Hey everyone, Chris here from Fatherly Fandom. Today we're going to be talking about the final episode of Season 6 of Better Call Saul. We finally made it to the end. Final episode of the final season. So let's get started. Oh my gosh, guys. Better Call Saul, episode 13, season 6, Saul Gone. Directed by Peter Gold, one of the co-creators of this with Vince Gilligan, and written by Peter Gold as well. I just gotta say, this was the perfect way to cap off this show and the Albuquerque story that we have with Better Call Saul, El Camino, and Breakingbad. I thought it was absolutely perfect. And I used to have this idea of what makes a good movie or a good television show in general. And what that meant to me was if I come out of the experience with a different perspective, a different point of view, a different way of thinking, then I think it was worth my time to actually sit and watch the show, watch the movie, and see that because it affected me in some way. And for all intents and purposes, this finale did that for me. This show did that for me. After watching the episode and thinking about the show as a whole, I can say without hesitation that this is my favorite of the Albuquerque shows. I actually do enjoy this more than Breaking Bad. You might have seen I was on the stream with Matt on our Sunday show, and I was talking about this as well, that this show in itself, I just absolutely love Bob Odenkirk. I love the writing. I love everything that has happened in this show. And it's just it perfectly complements Breaking Bad and improves upon the model of this show that deconstructs a character and takes them down a downward trajectory. Can't talk here. But it was amazing to see that and to see how this goes. So let's go into a little bit of my review here on Better Call Saul, episode 13 of season 6, Saul Gone. So let's get started here, okay? So, oh my gosh, I cannot say enough good things about Bob Odenkirk. He really does need to get an award, all the awards for his performance in this episode. The final episode focused on a question that Jimmy had, and he would ask in different times in his life, in his history. With the beginning that takes us back to the desert with Mike. We got to actually see that desert scene. You remember that desert scene in Better Call Saul a few seasons back where they're transporting all the money? I believe that this is like and the way that they structured these different time jumps in this episode, I truly believe that this scene has a lot of meaning in a lot of different ways. One, I believe like whenever you watch this episode when they're transporting the money and going through the desert, I believe this is the first part of Jimmy McGill becoming Saul Goodman. Like he's fully becoming Saul Goodman in that episode. So we kind of get to see the first part of Saul Goodman in the beginning of this episode, the final episode here of season 6. So with the beginning, it takes us back to this shot, and we get to see a new angle, a new situation where they find some water and he's drinking it down. They sit and they relax for a moment. I thought it was pretty interesting to see, the pee bottle come back and like he dumped it out and filled up that bottle with some water. Side note, I think he contaminated that well as well, if we can go by that. And so Jimmy McGill has a question and he asks Mike about it. So. And he asked Mike, if you had a time machine, like, we were sitting on all this money, what if we just take off with this money? And Mike's like, well, there's some people that will come after us. He's like, they're not going to be a problem because we're going to have a time machine. So he's kind of waxing and waning and being kind of pie in the sky like situation, dreaming of this situation. So he asked Mike the question, what would you do with a time machine? And so what happens is Mike Ehrmantraut first says that he would go December 1st, 2008. Now, it doesn't explicitly say in the episode, and I can't remember. And if you know this information, comment below too. But I do believe that date is probably when his son, Matty, was shot to death. So he probably thought of that date first because he wanted to save his kid. But then he quickly changed it to March 17th, 1984. That's the day he took his first bribe. And so that led him down a path where he landed, where he was at that point in his life. And I believe that first date, like I said, was the day that Matty was killed. He then says he'd go forward in time to check on his family. This is what drove the character of Mike to do the things that he did, was family. He was very family driven. All the money that he made went to his granddaughter. We saw that in Breaking Bad before he died. He set that all up. He wanted to take care of his family and make sure they were okay. This was the driving force for Mike throughout his story and his character in this. And it's very interesting to see the different dynamics of these characters that Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, actually interacts with during this whole process. And we see after that, Mike asks Jimmy, what would he do with a time machine? And Mike just asks Saul, and he talks about buying. Jimmy talks about buying stocks and becoming a billionaire. Is there trillionaires? That's what he says too. And then Mike remarks, money, that's all that's important to you. So, it's this idea, and he's kind of deflecting. Jimmy's deflecting at this point and just talking about money, not really talking about what the question actually means. And we'll get there too. And then the second time skip that we see in this is right after everything goes down in Breaking Bad and they've got to hide. So we see, once again, we've got Walter White and Jimmy McGill, or Saul Goodman at this point, fleeing from the law. They're down in that one hideout area, getting ready to leave, getting ready to go to Nebraska, and I believe it's New Hampshire, where Walter White is going. And so they're sitting down there, and Walter White is trying to fix the water heater and everything. He hears a click and everything. He's preoccupying himself trying to fix that. And so Saul asks him the same question. He's like, if you had a time machine, where would you go? And so Walter White aptly identifies that Saul isn't really asking about the time travel, but he's really asking about regrets. So this is when he brings it up. He's like, look, if you want to ask me about regrets, ask me about regrets. So he's very straightforward and to the point. And Walter explains after Saul's like, yeah, what were your regrets? And Walter explains that he started a company with his friends, which we know from Breaking Bad is known as gray matter, and that he wouldn't have walked away from that. So this gives you an insight to what Walter White's priorities and characters was. And even though Walter White would often say in Breaking Bad that his family was his driving force, this is all for my family, what it was always about for Walter White was power. And this absolutely shows that, because he was a part of a huge company that made millions and millions of dollars based off of his discoveries and everything else. And it was a huge company, and to be massively successful, everything he ever wanted, he always cared about power and being in charge and having all this stuff. Whereas juxtaposed against Mike, who all he cares about is family. And you get to see these through the regrets that they share with Jimmy throughout this thing. Then Walter asks Saul, and Saul responds by saying he would have been a little bit more careful with a slip and fall scam because he busted up his knee. So once again, Saul, Jimmy McGill, he's very much deflecting the question, not really talking about the heart of the issue, not talking about real regrets or whatnot. And it's very poignant, and this is the basis of the show, and this is the basis of this episode. Walter White just sits there and goes, and he gets up. And he gets up and he looks at him and he's like, so you've always been this way. And this is another thing that's been illustrated throughout the show, is that Jimmy can't be any better. He can't make better decisions for himself. He's always going to be slipping Jimmy, just like Chuck has told him time and time again. And this is his worldview. Chuck thinks that he's always going to be bad. He's always going to make the worst decisions, and he shouldn't be a lawyer. So this is where we get the real question about whether or not Jimmy can make better choices. And so far throughout the show, we're being proved Chuck right. We're being proved that Walter White is right about this character. He's always been this way. This is just who he is. It's ingrained in his character. So everything leading up to this has shown us that downward spiral and shown us that, hey, Jimmy is always going to be slipping Jimmy. He is Saul Goodman's just a more extreme version of slipping Jimmy. So he's just time and time again, he's made these choices that have brought him down this path and made him into this person that continues to make very bad decisions all the time. Finally, we get a scene with Chuck, which was one of my favorites, seeing Chuck and Jimmy together once again. And this was right. It seemed like it was the first part of when Chuck steps away from HHM and he secluded himself in his home. Chuck asked about Jimmy's clients while he's there, and then Jimmy just languishes about the people that he has to represent. And right there, Chuck just tells Jimmy, it's not too late to change your course. And this once again outlines to Jimmy that his brother doesn't think he's good enough to be a lawyer and that he will never change. He was always trying to get that approval from Chuck, and he just never got it. And just that whole relationship was very heartbreaking throughout the series, but it was very poignant. And each of these character involvements that we've seen in this finale have definitely showcased who those people are and how they viewed Jimmy McGill, how they viewed Saul Goodman. And those views are what are instilled in Jimmy and how he acts and how he takes in who he is personally throughout the show. And it's everybody has responsibility for themselves, but the people that we let in, the people closest to us, do impact our lives in very specific ways. And at the end of this scene with Chuck, it shows the book on Chuck's counter, and it's the time machine, which is what Jimmy is asking throughout with Walter White, with Mike Ehrmantraut. That's the question he's asking. And I guess throughout this season 6, we've seen shots of Jimmy reading this book. And so presumably he got it from his brother Chuck. And that's what brought up this whole situation and brought him down the road. And so that question is kind of like, and this is the farthest back we went in this timeline in this episode. We got this was the farthest back, and this is where Jimmy's real regret lies. His course in continuing on being a lawyer, continuing to believe he was no good, that he could never live up to what Chuck expected of him. He feels regret over that decision because it led him to doing what he did, which discredited Chuck, got rid of his insurance, and led Chuck to ultimately take his own life. So he very much regrets that. And that is the thing that we get to and we start to understand at this point in time in the story, in this final episode. And one could argue that these three men, these figures in Jimmy's life, viewed Jimmy into what he eventually became and thought of himself too. This money-hungry, crooked lawyer who would never make it as a legit lawyer, someone who is really incapable of change. So all these three major figures really did influence Jimmy for the worse. And as we've seen in the show, as it progressed, and later on in this final season, that idea he could never change did seem to be correct. It really did. So Saul even got his deal to serve 7 years for all he had done. Everything that happened, like Saul was able to get it just by hook and by crook. Saul was able to get it all the way down to 7 years. It was unbelievable. So he, true to form, like Saul does best, he conned and cheated his way into getting what he wants. Everything seemed to show that Saul wouldn't change. Not really. That is up up until he hears the plan about what Kim did, how she signed the affidavit, how she took that to Howard's widow as well, and how she was very open and honest. And the first time he heard that Kim did this and signed the affidavit when they were trying to, work out a deal, a plea bargain with the attorneys, he heard that, Kim actually fessed up and did the right thing. And the showrunners actually said this, and this is, I believe this is true too. This is the point in the episode where Saul Goodman began to become Jimmy McGill again. Just hearing about Kim doing the right thing was enough for Saul to come back to Jimmy, to come back to the person that he was, and to realize that he could make a better decision. So on the plane, that's when this idea came to him. That's when he started to formulate his plan. We didn't know at the time until we saw the hearing in the courtroom when he brought in Kim as well. And this brings us to the ending of this show. The ending and the final scenes of the show are some of the best performances I've ever seen. And Bob Odenkirk definitely deserves all the awards for his performance. As we think Saul is going to give his tearful account of how he was the victim, he looks back at Kim and begins to do something he's never done before. He tells the truth, and to the horror of his buddy Bill Oakley, the advisory council that he picked, he tells the truth. This is a drastic shift for the character to do the right thing and a monumental step for Jimmy. And I believe it's all because of his real love for Kim and what she did. He is truly in love with Kim. And she has always been, they often showed in the show that they were a toxic relationship, but at the same point, they also could be a force for good for each other. They can bring each other up. And Kim was always a person in the show that would always think the highest of Jimmy and want him to do better. Whereas, Chuck would always be thinking that he was slipping Jimmy. Kim was the opposite of that. She was always trying to encourage him and make sure that he was on the right path, at least in the beginning of the show. And that was beautiful to see. And it was good to see that the saving grace for Jimmy, the reason why Jimmy McGill came back, the reason why he did the right thing was because of Kim. It was all because of Kim and what she did and how she stood up for herself and told the truth in her way with the affidavit and going to Howard Hamlin's widow as well, opening herself up to litigation, civil litigation through that process and still standing up and doing the right thing. And that just shows so much real love for Kim. She really was the only person that was really close to him, that was really rooting for him throughout this entire show. Kim, and during this point, Kim didn't seem like she was getting emotional, and she was very stoic throughout the thing as, Jimmy was starting to confess to all this stuff. And by the end, you could see that look that they shared with each other, said it all without saying a thing. So Jimmy was sentenced to jail, and we see the praise on the bus for this. Let me see if I can pull that up on here. Is this one? Yeah. So he's going to jail, and he's going to the jail that he said was the worst jail to go to, and that he didn't want to go to. And so we get to see him sentenced, and everybody recognizes him on the bus as Better Call Saul, and they start to chant really loudly. And so this idea comes about that, hey, Saul, this idea of Saul is going to actually make his time in prison a little bit easier for him because, he was a defense attorney for all these criminals and everything. So they obviously think pretty highly of this guy. And even though they're chanting Better Call Saul, Better Call Saul, he identified himself as Jimmy, and he really is Jimmy, but he's using the moniker of Saul to kind of make his time, in prison a little bit easier for him. And so we cut away, and then we see that Jimmy is actually in the kitchen. He's making some bread and everything, kind of juxtaposed to his time working at Cinnabon. And you see him cutting the dough and everything, and then making the bread. And I love these little moments where they show these kind of things. It's beautiful to see. The cinematographer is doing a fantastic job with the show. And so the final few scenes are beautifully mastered, both in performance and how it's filmed. It's absolutely beautiful how these final scenes that we see, especially with Kim and Jimmy, as she comes to the prison and pretends to be the lawyer. And she was able to do that because her bar association card didn't have an expiration date. So she came back. So it showed that relationship between them has been mended. The animosity and all the problems that they had have been put to the side because of what Jimmy did. Jimmy actually standing up for himself. And Kim coming back to see Jimmy and sharing one last cigarette together, just as they did the very first episode of the show. It wraps it up in a nice little bow for the series. If you notice, too, the flame of the cigarette is the only color in the shot. You actually see the color of the flame, which to me symbolizes hope and a possibility that both characters can have a little bit of happiness, maybe a little bit of optimism even, if it's symbolizing this tiny little flame in this bleak and dark situation where we've seen just black and white, which symbolizes that nothing is good, nothing's going to be good. We see this little flame, this tiny little flame there, as a little symbol of hope, and I love that. And it was beautifully done. And if you notice the light, whenever they lean up against the wall, they are mostly in the light. Both of them are prominently in the light, which in the first episode of Better Call Saul, they are mostly in the dark, half in the dark, half in the light. So that's another beautiful scene that wraps up this whole entire show. And I love the way that they play with imagery. It's so beautifully done. It's so awesome. And as I wrapping that up and she's leaving, Jimmy's out there and in the field behind the chain link fence and everything. He's out there, and as Jimmy looks at Kim in the yard, and we get that shot of a large space between them down the fence line. It's beautifully shot too. We see that now Kim can move on with her life while Jimmy faces paying for the choices that he made, knowing full well that he could have gotten out of it. But he took the high road, and this is why he deserves to smile at the end and go out with finger gun shooting. Now, apparently, they had an alternate scene there where Kim actually does finger guns back to him, but in this, you only slightly see her make the finger gun with one hand before it cuts. And I thought that was beautifully done. And it was like, and Jimmy earned that smile on his face by taking the high road. In the end, the show's message, and the way I take it, is that it's never too late to make a different choice. And we don't have to fall into our old habits and destructive tendencies. Though it might cost us much, the right decisions are still the right ones, even if they're the hardest thing that you have to do. With Jimmy being called Saul in prison, it kind of hints at, him letting people think of him that way. But we all know that, Saul is dead by the end of this. Jimmy is now back. And it's absolutely amazing to see this show wrap up. I absolutely loved this episode. I absolutely love this season and this series, and it's beautifully well done. I would argue to say that this has been the best show that I have seen in 2022. Now, for an overall rating, what I would give Saul's Gone, episode 13 of Better Call Saul, I would give it a 9 out of 10. It was nearly perfect for me. Everything, it hit all the emotional beats that I want. It wrapped everything up. It brought us together with Breakingbad. It built upon this Albuquerque story that we've been watching for years and years and years. And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was beautifully shot. The imagery, the symbolism, the story was well written. So a 9 out of 10 for me, A+ if I was going to give it a letter grade as well. For the season in general, I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. There were a few slower episodes and a few episodes where I was just like, oh, what are we doing here? What's happening here? So 7 out of 10 for the season. Overall, the series as a whole, Better Call Saul, I would give an 8 out of 10. This is one of my favorite series The only other series I can think of that outdoes it, especially with the writing, is probably The Wire. That's the one show that I would say is probably better than Better Call Saul. But I do enjoy this show. I do love this show more than Breaking Bad, and I do love Breaking Bad too. It feels on a higher level for me. Now with Better Call Saul, it's a very interesting show, and it can't be categorized in this way or not. It's a dark comedy at points. It's a serious drama at other points. It's a criminal show, a crime show at other points in this. And it's really hard to pinpoint what this is. And for an audience, I believe it's really hard for an audience to jump into this without seeing Breaking Bad. Can you? I believe you probably can. You can probably jump in this without seeing Breaking Bad, but you aren't going to get as much out of it if you haven't seen Breaking Bad. So I highly suggest watching Breaking Bad before you watch this. Go back and watch Better Call Saul after that fact. If you've sat through my review, though, this entire time without watching Breaking Bad, shame on you. You should be watching the show and then watching these. So it was an amazing show. I absolutely loved it. I hear that Peter Gould and Vince Gilligan are going to be moving on from these Albuquerque shows and doing something else. Really excited to see that. But they kind of left it open to the possibility of doing something down the road. Now, what I would like to see, I would love to see Giancarlo Esposito come back. And I would love to see a Gus Fring show, maybe a young Gus Fring, to see how he got to where he was. That's what I would love to see. What would you guys like to see? So comment below about what you would like to see from future installments in this Albuquerque story with Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould. If you would like to see anything else, or if you think that they should leave it alone, I absolutely think they should leave it alone for a while. They should move on to other things for a while. Let us enjoy what we got. I'll probably go back and rewatch Better Call Saul again. I'll probably rewatch Breaking Bad at some point as well. But I would like to see them take a break for a while. But if they do come back to it, I would love to see a Gus Fring show. That's the one. I want to see that character more developed. I think he deserves it. I think every time that Giancarlo Esposito was in the show, he elevated it to another level too. And Mike Ehrmantraut was amazing. I love that character. He's one of my favorite characters. Mike has always been one of my favorites. And if I can get more of him, I would love that too. But that's probably less of a possibility. So absolutely loved it. Thought it was great show. I hope you enjoyed the finale. It was awesome getting to share this with you, my fatherly fan base here. And I hope what we're going to be moving into now is She-Hulk comes out this week. August 18th, it drops. It's going to drop at midnight, so you can see it at midnight, first thing in the morning on August 18th. And so I'll be covering that. I'll be doing some initial reactions on that. And then me and Matt are going to get together once a week and talk about all the things that we're watching and everything. So you can look forward to that with Fatherly Fandom. If you haven't already, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our channel. We really need the support. It won't cost you anything. You won't be bothered with anything. All you'll be doing is getting notified when we put up new content. And you'll be helping out Fatherly Fandom too. You'll be helping out the show. Because once we reach 50 subscribers, what happens then is we're able to record on our mobile phone. So if we get out of the movie theater and we have a really cool movie that we watch, we can give you an in-depth review right straight from the theater. And there's lots of other events and things like that we can cover with our mobile phones as well. Once we get to 100 subscribers, then we'll be able to brand out a little bit more. So please do us a favor here. Subscribe to Fatherly Fandom. Click on that little subscription down below. Give us some good comments. Let me know what you think about Better Call Saul as a series, as this season, as this episode. Let me know what you think, and I will. If you comment, I will read those on the live stream that we do with Matt on Sunday. We're also talking about getting together on Friday, so we might be getting together on Friday as well. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for She-Hulk. It's an exciting time for us, and thanks for joining us here on Fatherly Fandom. So from my family to yours, adios, amigos. Until next time, take care.